My name is Lauren Holloway, and I'm 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, I pulled into the driveway of the house I bought for my parents and found a man with a clipboard and a laser measure photographing a property. He was a real estate appraiser. I walked inside. My father was sitting on the porch, shaking so badly his coffee spilled onto his shoes. My mother was hiding in the kitchen. Sitting at the dining table with a stack of bank documents and a smug smile I had not seen in 7 years was my older brother, Justin. He slid a pen across the oak table and told my parents to sign away the equity of the house I paid for. He needed the money to cover a $60,000 Mercedes he bought using my stolen Social Security number. I looked at the forged documents. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Family takes care of family." Let me take you back to 4 years ago, to the exact moment I became the safety net for people who only saw me as a bank account. I work as a senior tax auditor for a corporate firm in Ohio. My days are spent looking at ledgers and finding missing numbers. I do not operate on emotion. I operate on verifiable facts. Marbright Druff, 6 years old, and calls himself a serial entrepreneur. In my family, that is just a polite way of saying he has never held a job for more than 8 months and relies entirely on my parents Richard and Diane to bail him out of his bad decisions. Growing up, Justin was the golden child. If he broke a window, I was scolded for leaving the baseball in the yard. When I graduated college with honors, my parents skipped my celebratory dinner to help Justin move out of an apartment he was being evicted from. I accepted my role a long time ago. I was the responsible one. I was the shield. When my father's health began to decline, I knew Justin would not step up. I used my own savings to buy my parents a beautiful $325,000 house on a quiet cul-de-sac. I paid the down payment and the closing costs. I put the deed in their names so they would feel a sense of pride and ownership. But I set one strict boundary. Justin was never allowed to use the house as collateral for his businesses. My parents looked me in the eyes and swore they understood. They lied. The first sign of the betrayal did not come from a phone call or a tearful confession. It came from a silent push notification on my phone. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a client portfolio when my screen lit up with an alert from Experian. My credit score was an 810. I had guarded it with my life. I clicked the notification. The screen refreshed. My score had plummeted to a 620 overnight. I did not panic. I did not cry. I opened my laptop and pulled the full credit report. A new delinquent auto loan had been opened 6 months prior. The balance was exactly $60,450. The lender was Mercedes-Benz Financial Services. I scrolled down to the primary address tied to the loan, and my stomach dropped. It was my parents' address, the house I bought for them. I called the dealership listed on the inquiry. The finance manager cheerfully pulled up the file. He confirmed that I had purchased a pearl white C-Class. He emailed me the paperwork right there on the phone. Staring back at me from my laptop screen was my Social Security number, a butchered forgery of my signature and 2 names listed as secondary personal references. Richard and Diane Holloway. My parents had not just known about the fraud, they had handed Justin the keys to my identity. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their lives, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Sweet Karma Life. Drop your age, your location, and your local time in the comments. I really want to know who is listening and where you are right now. Staring at the stack of documents on the oak dining table, I felt the familiar quiet settle over my mind. As a senior tax auditor, I do not panic when confronted with bad math. I dissect it. My daily professional life consists of tracking missing assets, unraveling corporate shell companies, and finding the exact point where a ledger turns into a lie. People think auditing is just about calculators. It is actually about human behavior. Numbers do not commit fraud. People do. Right now, sitting across from me, my older brother Justin was attempting to commit fraud in plain sight. He wore a tailored quarter-zip sweater and a silver watch. He looked like a successful businessman. But I knew the watch was a replica and the sweater was paid for by our parents. He tapped his expensive-looking pen against the home equity line of credit application. The top page requested a draw of $75,000 against the property on Elm Tree Lane, the property I purchased with my own money. Justin called himself a serial entrepreneur. In the corporate finance world, we call his type a systemic liability. In our family, they called him a visionary experiencing temporary setbacks. Over the last 10 years, his ventures included a luxury dog walking service that ended in 3 civil lawsuits and an artisan coffee roasting business that resulted in a structural fire at a leased warehouse. Each time his companies collapsed, my parents emptied their retirement accounts to settle the damages out of court. They remortgaged their previous house twice to keep him away from bankruptcy proceedings. When the bank finally foreclosed on that childhood home, my mother blamed the national economy. My father blamed the lending institution. Neither of them ever placed the blame on the son, who actively drained their resources dry. I learned very early in life that I was not a priority. I was the utility player, kept on the bench until an emergency required my presence. I accepted this dynamic the day I graduated from Ohio State University. I had earned my degree with honors. I rented my graduation gown and paid for my own cap. I reserved a table for 3 at a quiet Italian restaurant near the campus, expecting my parents to attend the evening ceremony. I sat at that table alone for 2 hours. I watched the ice melt in their water glasses. The hostess eventually approached and quietly cleared away the extra plates. I ate my dinner in silence. Later that night, my mother called my cell phone. She did not apologize. She simply stated they had to skip my graduation because Justin was being evicted from his loft apartment downtown. He needed them to pack his collection of vintage sneakers and designer clothes before the landlord changed the locks. I paid my own check that night. I paid my own tuition. I secured my own job. I built a quiet, predictable life, heavily insulated from their constant chaos. That insulation held until 5 years ago when my father's hands started shaking. The doctors diagnosed him with early-onset Parkinson's disease. He could no longer manage stairs safely. At the time, my parents were renting an apartment on the 3rd floor of a brick building with a broken elevator. I watched my dad struggle to carry a single bag of groceries up those concrete steps. I made a decision based on duty rather than warmth. I had accumulated significant savings by living strictly below my means. I found the single-story house on Elm Tree Lane. The asking price was $325,000. I handled the transaction entirely on my own. I paid a 20% down payment. I covered the closing costs. I drafted a formal lease agreement charging them a token rent of $1 a month. But I put the property deed in their names. I did this deliberately because the state required primary residence status to qualify for specific disability tax exemptions my father desperately needed to afford his medical care. The day we finalized the paperwork, I sat my parents down in the sterile conference room of the title company. I slid the brass house keys across the mahogany desk. I set one non-negotiable condition. I told them the house was a sanctuary. It was not a piggy bank. I looked directly at my mother and stated they would never take a loan against the equity. They would never use the property to fund another one of Justin's business ideas. I explained that if he needed startup money, he could walk into a bank and submit a business plan like a normal adult. If he ruined his credit, he would face the consequences alone. They were to leave the equity untouched. My father looked me in the eyes. He placed his shaking hand over mine. He promised. My mother wiped her eyes, and called me a blessing to the family. They swore they understood the boundary. Now, 4 years later, that promise lay dead on the kitchen table. The bank appraiser was pacing outside in the yard, photographing the exterior walls to finalize the property valuation. Justin needed the house equity to pay off the fraudulent auto loan he took out in my name before the collection agency seized his pearl white Mercedes. He had trapped my parents in a corner. If they seized the vehicle, the resulting fraud investigation would trace back to the forged dealership documents. Justin would face felony charges for identity theft. He was actively using the threat of his own arrest to extort my parents out of their only remaining asset. He knew they would rather lose their home than see their golden child in a courtroom. Justin leaned forward, pressing his elbows onto the table. He tapped the paperwork again. "Come on, Lauren," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Do not make this a whole thing. I just need Dad to sign this so I can clear up a minor cash flow issue with the car. My consulting business is about to land a massive corporate client. I will pay the loan back in 6 months. It is just a temporary bridge." He was not asking for my permission. He was gloating. Because the deed was legally in their names, he believed I had no power to stop the bank transaction. He thought he had outsmarted the tax auditor. I looked at my mother. She finally stopped staring at the sink and met my eyes. Her face was pale. "Lauren, please," she whispered. "We have to help him. If he loses the car, he loses his professional image. We are family. Family takes care of family." I did not raise my voice. I did not throw the coffee mug sitting near my hand. I calmly reached across the oak table. I picked up the thick stack of home equity loan applications. I aligned the edges perfectly, tapping them against the wood. Justin reached out to snatch them back, but I pulled them out of his reach. I looked at the exact dollar amount he was trying to steal from my parents' security. $75,000. I folded the documents in half and placed them inside my leather bag. "You are right, Justin," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "We need to resolve this cash flow issue right now. But we are not using the house." I stood up from the table and turned my back on him. I walked toward the front door where the appraiser was taking notes on the grass. I was going to handle the debt my way. And Justin had no idea I was carrying the spare smart key to his $60,000 life right inside my purse. The first sign of the fire did not come from a frantic phone call or tearful confession. It came from a silent push notification. 3 days before I walked out of my parents' house with those home equity documents, I was sitting at my desk in downtown Columbus. It was a Tuesday morning. Rain was hitting the glass of my office window. I was reviewing a complex corporate tax return on my dual monitors. My phone rested on the edge of the desk facing up. At exactly 10:14 in the morning, the screen illuminated. It was an automated alert from Experian. I picked up the device. I tapped the notification. The application loaded and presented my dashboard. For the past 8 years, my credit score had been a pristine 810. I guarded that number with my life. When you grow up in a family that operates in a state of constant financial ruin, you learn early that your credit score is your only armor against the world. I never missed a payment. I never carried a balance. The number on the screen was now 620. I did not drop the phone, but I felt a sudden wave of nausea rise in my throat. My fingers tightened around the device until my knuckles turned white. For exactly 3 seconds, I allowed myself to feel the absolute terror of a ruined identity. Then I swallowed it down. I forced my breathing to slow. In my line of work, a sudden mathematical anomaly is not a reason to panic. Panic is the enemy. It is a reason to dig. I placed the phone back on the desk. I opened a new tab on my computer browser and logged directly into the main credit bureau portal. I requested a comprehensive disclosure report. I paid the nominal fee and downloaded the file. I opened the document and began scrolling through the trade lines. I bypassed my student loan history. I bypassed my single credit card. Then I found it. Sitting under the installment accounts section was a brand new auto loan. The origination date was exactly 6 months prior. The status was marked 90 days delinquent. The principal balance was $60,450. The lending institution was listed as Mercedes-Benz Financial Services. I shifted my eyes to the right side of the screen. I needed to see the mailing address associated with the fraudulent account. The text was small but clear. It listed the property on Elm Tree Lane, the house I bought from my parents. I picked up my phone again. I searched the internet for the specific auto dealership network associated with that zip code. I dialed the main office number. A receptionist answered. I asked to be transferred to the finance department regarding a recent purchase. Soft jazz hold music played for 2 minutes before a man picked up the line. He introduced himself as a senior finance manager. His voice was cheerful and professional. I gave him my name. I told him I was calling to request a digital copy of my original purchase agreement for my records. I recited the last 4 digits of my Social Security number. I heard him typing on his keyboard. "Yes, Lauren," he said brightly. "I have your file right here. The Pearl White C-Class, beautiful vehicle. I see you financed the extended warranty as well. Give me 1 second and I will send the entire packet to the email address we have on file." I asked him to verify the email address. He read back a generic Gmail account that consisted of my first initial, my last name, and a string of numbers. I told him I no longer had access to that inbox and provided my secure work email. He updated the system and hit send. A moment later, the notification chimed on my computer. I opened the message and downloaded the attached PDF. The document was 24 pages long. I scrolled past the vehicle specifications. I scrolled past the amortization schedule. I stopped on page 14. The Master Purchase Agreement. Staring back at me from the glowing monitor was my full Social Security number. Below it was a butchered forgery of my signature. I leaned closer to the screen. I do not use cursive when I sign legal documents. I use sharp block lettering. The signature on the digital page featured wide, careless loops. It was the exact handwriting of my older brother, Justin. My name to a military liability, but luxury dealerships do not hand over keys based on the signature alone. They require a physical photo ID. I scrolled to the final page of the PDF where the dealership attached a scanned copy of the buyer's identification. Staring back at me was a counterfeit Ohio driver's license. It had my name, my address, and my exact date of birth. But the photograph was of a woman I did not recognize. She had my hair color and my general build. Justin had hired a stand-in to play the role of his wealthy sister. But Justin is not a criminal mastermind. He is lazy. He would never know my Social Security number by memory to print on a fake ID. He would not know my exact gross annual income, which was listed perfectly on page 3 of the application. There was only one place he could have obtained that specific information. When I moved out of my childhood home, I left a sealed fireproof lockbox in my parents' basement. It contained my old tax returns and my original Social Security card. My father had the only spare key to that box. I kept scrolling down the document. I reached the section labeled Secondary Personal References. Lenders require this information to track down a buyer if the vehicle goes into default. I looked at the 2 names printed on the final page: Richard and Diane Holloway. My parents had not merely turned a blind eye to the fraud. They had actively participated. They had taken the key. They had walked down to the basement. They had opened my lockbox and handed my identity to Justin so he could project the image of a successful businessman. They had answered the verification phone call from the dealership and confirmed my forged employment details. They helped him steal my name. The betrayal settled over me. It was not a heated rush of anger. It was a cold, quiet clarity. For years, I had played the role of the reliable daughter. I had sacrificed my own disposable income to ensure they had a roof over their heads. I had insulated them from the consequences of their endless enabling. They repaid me by serving me up as collateral. They assumed I would react the way I always did. They expected me to discover the loan, get upset, yell for a few minutes, and then quietly figure out a way to pay it off to protect my own credit score. They calculated that my fear of financial ruin would outweigh my desire for justice. They banked on my silence. I closed the PDF. I minimized the window. I opened the blank Word document and began typing a formal chronological timeline of events. I listed dates. I listed dollar amounts. I listed the exact penal codes for identity theft and wire fraud in the state of Ohio. I was not going to pay the loan. I was not going to yell. I was going to strip them of every single asset they valued. I picked up my phone and called my manager. I requested 2 days of personal time. I packed my briefcase and walked out of the corporate office. Justin thought he owned a luxury vehicle. My parents thought they owned a home. I was about to teach them a very hard lesson about property law. My first stop was not the police precinct. My first stop was the service center of the dealership. If the car was legally financed in my name, then under the eyes of the law, it was my property. And as the legal owner, I had the right to request a replacement key. I stood in the entryway of the house on Elm Tree Lane, clutching my leather briefcase. The air conditioning kicked on, blowing a stream of cool air against the back of my neck. I looked through the sheer fabric of the living room curtains. The man with the clipboard was still in the front yard. He was a real estate appraiser. Justin had stopped making the monthly payments on the $60,000 Mercedes-Benz 4 months prior, and the collection notices were escalating. He knew the tow trucks were coming. So he forced my parents to apply for a massive home equity loan to save his luxury vehicle. The man outside was sent by the bank to assess the value of the collateral. He was documenting the property condition to ensure the lending institution could safely approve a $75,000 lien against the house I paid for. I turned away from the window and walked into the kitchen. The smell of stale coffee hung in the air. Justin was sitting at the center of the oak dining table. He wore his tailored quarter-zip sweater and projected an aura of casual confidence. He slid a premium metal pen across the smooth wood surface. The pen came to a stop inches from my father's shaking hands. Resting directly in front of my dad was a thick stack of bank documents. The bold black lettering at the top of the first page read, Home Equity Line of Credit Application. Because I had placed the property deed in my parents' names to secure their medical tax exemptions, I had inadvertently handed Justin a weapon. He was weaponizing their legal ownership against my financial investment. He was currently manipulating 2 elderly retirees into taking out a $75,000 loan against the remaining equity of their home. He calculated the exact amount needed to pay off the fraudulent auto loan, clear the late fees, cover the recovery penalties, and leave himself a comfortable margin of cash. He intended to drain the sanctuary I built for them. He would wash his hands of the felony identity theft while leaving our parents chained to a massive high-interest mortgage they could never afford to repay. My father stared down at the signature line. His hand trembled so violently the table vibrated. My mother stood near the porcelain sink. She refused to look in my direction. She kept her eyes fixed on the stainless steel faucet. Justin leaned back in his chair and offered a bright white smile. "Hey, sis," he said lightly. "Perfect timing. We are just having a quick family meeting. Dad is just helping me with a little cash flow issue." I did not return his smile. I placed my briefcase on the granite kitchen counter. I walked over to the table and picked up the application. I did not ask for permission. I simply lifted the pages and began to read the terms of their destruction. The financial mechanics of the proposed loan were predatory. The bank was offering a variable interest rate starting at 9.5%. My parents survived on a combined fixed Social Security income of $2,400 a month. My father's prescription medications cost $400 out of pocket every 30 days. I looked at the amortization schedule printed on the second page. The minimum monthly payment for this new debt would be roughly $700. It would instantly consume nearly a third of their monthly survival budget. I looked directly at my father. I asked him if he understood the math. I asked him if he realized that signing his name on that dotted line guaranteed his future homelessness. My father kept his head down. He mumbled that Justin promised to make the monthly payments. He whispered that his son was expecting a large influx of capital from a new consulting contract. I turned my attention to my mother. She was the primary enabler. She was the architect of his delusions. I asked her how she planned to pay the property taxes when Justin inevitably defaulted. I reminded her of his artisan coffee roasting business that ended in a commercial warehouse fire. I brought up his luxury dog walking app that resulted in 3 separate civil lawsuits. I listed the previous times they had drained their retirement accounts to settle his debts out of court. I asked her point blank if she was prepared to move my father into a state-funded Medicaid nursing facility when the bank foreclosed on the property. She finally turned away from the sink. Her face was pale. She wrung her dish towel between her hands. She pleaded with me to lower my voice. She said Justin needed the car to maintain a professional image for his clients. She told me I was being entirely too rigid. She suggested that because I had a lucrative career in corporate auditing, I could simply step in and cover the mortgage payments if things got tight. Her words hung in the quiet kitchen. She was not just willing to sacrifice her own shelter to protect her golden child. She expected me to finance the sacrifice. She expected the safety net to expand infinitely, catching every single reckless decision he ever made. Justin dropped his casual facade. He sat forward and slammed his hand flat against the oak table. He told me to stop trying to scare them with numbers. He pointed a finger at my face and ordered me to put the application down. He claimed he had the situation completely under control. He said the appraiser outside was just a formality for the bank, and the wired funds would clear his auto loan before the week ended. I looked down at the documents in my hand. I realized in that exact moment that logic would not save my parents. Mathematical facts could not penetrate decades of psychological conditioning. If I tried to argue with them, my father would eventually pick up the metal pen. He would sign the pages just to stop the conflict. The bank would process the lien. The house would be lost. I could not win a debate against their blind loyalty. I had to permanently remove the leverage. I had to neutralize the threat sitting in the driveway. Justin stood up from his chair, his face flushed red. He stepped toward me and demanded the paperwork. He told me I had no legal authority to intervene. He proudly stated the deed was in their names. He threatened to dial emergency services and have me removed from the premises for stealing bank documents. I folded the heavy stack of paper in half. I slid the application into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. I looked at my brother and told him he was correct. I acknowledged that the property belonged to them. I agreed I had no right to stop a home equity loan. But I reminded him that the white sedan parked outside was registered to my Social Security number. It was financed under my name. It was my credit profile. And as a senior tax auditor, I do not allow outstanding liabilities to remain on my ledger. I turned my back on the kitchen table and walked toward the front door. I left them standing in the silence of their own manufactured crisis. I had a precise trap to build, and I needed to gather my receipts. I stepped off the porch of the house on Elm Tree Lane, carrying the home equity application inside the inner pocket of my suit jacket. Justin shouted from the open doorway behind me. He demanded I return the paperwork. He claimed I was stealing private property and threatened to call law enforcement. I did not turn around. I did not engage in a screaming match on the front lawn. I simply walked past the appraiser who was busy measuring the exterior dimensions of the garage. I unlocked my Honda Accord, started the engine, and drove away. I drove exactly the speed limit. I watched my childhood family fade into the rearview mirror. When I reached my townhouse, I placed the folded bank documents on my kitchen island. I opened my laptop, secured 48 hours of personal leave from my firm, and immediately began organizing a physical binder. In corporate auditing, you do not bring accusations to a meeting. You bring an unbreakable chain of custody. I bypassed the minor emails and alerts. I only printed the 24-page vehicle purchase agreement featuring the forged signature. I placed the documents into a clear plastic sleeve. I was building a legal fortress. My brother operated on emotional manipulation. He relied on my parents to shield him from the consequences of his actions. I was stripping away the emotion and replacing it with federal law. The next morning, I drove to the local police precinct. The building smelled of floor wax and stale air. I waited at the front desk until a uniformed officer directed me to the Financial Crimes Division on the second floor. I sat across from a detective named Miller. He looked exhausted. He asked how he could help. I did not give him a dramatic story about familial betrayal or childhood neglect. I opened my binder. I handed him the printed credit report. I handed him the forged contract. I pointed to the signature on page 14. I slid my state-issued identification card across the metal desk. I told him someone had stolen my Social Security number to finance a luxury vehicle. Detective Miller compared the sharp block lettering on my license to the wide, careless loops on the contract. He sat up straighter. He pulled his keyboard closer and asked if I knew who the perpetrator was. I told him the primary driver of the vehicle was my older brother. I told him the secondary references were my parents. I provided their exact address. The detective stopped typing. He looked at me carefully. He explained that if he submitted the official paperwork, the jurisdiction would shift out of my control. He warned me that active warrants would be generated for forged financial instruments. He asked if I was prepared to see my own family members face felony charges. I looked back at him without blinking. I told him to file the report. He printed a formal identity theft document. He stamped it with an official case number. I folded the copy and placed it in my binder. The single piece of paper was my shield. It officially classified the dealership transaction as a crime, thereby releasing me from the financial liability. But I was not finished. I left the precinct and drove across town to the Mercedes-Benz dealership. I bypassed the shiny showroom floor and walked directly to the service department. A service advisor greeted me at the counter. I handed him the first page of the forged contract and my state identification. Because Justin had used my personal information to secure the financing, he had unintentionally handed me total legal ownership of the asset. Under the eyes of the law, he was just a man driving my vehicle. I did not ask for a physical key. Modern luxury vehicles have strict security protocols that require the car to be present for key fob programming. But I am an auditor. I work with digital access every day. I told the advisor I needed to activate the primary digital key and register my mobile device to the master account. The advisor verified my documents and my identity. He turned his computer monitor toward me. He guided me through the process of downloading the official manufacturer application onto my cellular phone. He input his authorization codes and linked the vehicle identification number directly to my device. The process took less than 15 minutes. The advisor explained that my phone was now the absolute master key. It could unlock the doors, start the engine, and track the exact GPS location of the car. I did not pay $400 for a piece of plastic. The application download was free. I drove home and prepared for the final phase. I went to sleep that night with the police report on my nightstand and complete control of Justin's vehicle resting quietly in the palm of my hand. On Thursday afternoon, I sent a single text message to a group chat containing my mother, my father, and my brother. The message was brief. I told them I had reviewed the bank documents. I told them we needed to resolve the financial situation immediately. I requested a formal family meeting for Friday evening at 6 o'clock sharp at the house on Elm Tree Lane. Justin replied within 2 minutes. He sent a thumbs up emoji. He assumed I had caved under the pressure. He assumed the reliable safety net was expanding to catch him once again. My mother replied with a red heart. They thought I was bringing the signed paperwork to save the property and clear his debt. They believed they had won. I spent Thursday night pressing my clothes. I laid out a dark structured blazer and tailored trousers. I wanted to look exactly like the corporate auditor they tried to defraud. Friday morning arrived. I packed my briefcase. The trap was set and I was ready to spring it. The dashboard clock in my Honda Accord read exactly 6 in the evening when I turned onto Elm Tree Lane. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the quiet neighborhood. I pulled up to the property I purchased 4 years ago. I could not pull into the garage. The driveway was blocked. Justin had parked his pearl-white Mercedes-Benz diagonally across the concrete. He did not pull in straight. He left the rear bumper jutting over the sidewalk, forcing pedestrians to step into the street to maneuver around his vehicle. It was a physical manifestation of his entire existence. He took up space he did not earn and forced everyone else to navigate around his inconvenience. The premium paint gleamed under the amber glow of the streetlights. I parked my sedan on the curb. I turned off the engine. I picked up my structured leather briefcase. Inside the main compartment sat the formal police report and the forged dealership contract. My cellular phone, the new digital master key, rested safely in my pocket. I walked up the 3 wooden porch steps. I did not knock. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The house was quiet, but the tension in the filtered air was thick. I walked straight into the dining area. My family was already assembled. They looked like a corporate board bracing for a hostile takeover. My father sat on the left side of the oak table. He wore a faded flannel shirt. His hands rested flat against the wood, his knuckles white from the pressure. My mother hovered near the kitchen stove, wiping down a spotless granite counter with a microfiber cloth. She used cleaning as a coping mechanism whenever reality threatened to breach her manufactured peace. Justin sat on the right side. He wore a crisp navy button-down shirt. A ceramic plate holding a half-eaten turkey sandwich sat in front of him. He was casually scrolling through his phone, unbothered by the financial wreckage he had created. I bypassed the empty chair at the foot of the table. I walked to the head of the table. That seat traditionally belonged to my father. Today, I claimed it. I set my briefcase on the floor. I placed my cell phone face down on the polished wood. I sat down and folded my hands. The shift in physical dynamics forced my mother to stop wiping the counter. She draped the cloth over the sink. She walked over and took the seat next to my father. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. She had clearly been crying earlier in the afternoon. She took a deep breath and launched into the script she had spent 3 decades perfecting. It was the script designed to minimize Justin's damage and maximize my guilt. "Lauren," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Please try to understand the position we are in. Justin is launching his new consulting firm next month. He is meeting with high net worth investors downtown. He needs that vehicle to project success. You work in corporate finance. You know how important professional image is in the business world." She reached across the table and placed her hand over my father's shaking fingers. She looked at me, pleading for submission. "You make such good money, Lauren. You have a pension. You have a robust savings account. We knew you would not mind if he used your credit profile just this once to get the loan approved. The interest rates were too high for his current score. We are family. Family takes care of family." Her words hung in the dining room. She actually believed her own narrative. In her mind, Justin had not committed a felony. He had simply utilized a shared family resource. She viewed my pristine credit score the same way she viewed the milk in the refrigerator. It was a household commodity anyone could take when they needed it. I remembered a Tuesday afternoon when I was 12 years old. I found my ceramic piggy bank shattered on the bedroom floor. Justin had stolen $50 I earned from tutoring to buy a new skateboard. When I discovered the empty jar, my mother wiped my tears and told me I should be grateful to share my blessings with my brother. 30 years later, the logic remained untouched. The dollar amount had simply escalated from $50 to $60,000. I did not raise my voice. I did not express outrage. Anger is an inefficient emotion during an audit. I unzipped the top compartment of my briefcase. I withdrew a thick manila folder. I placed it squarely in the center of the oak table. I opened the cover. I arranged the documents so they faced my parents. The first page visible was the official Experian credit alert showing the massive point drop. The second document was the 24-page dealership purchase agreement featuring the forged signature and their names listed as references. The third paper was the formal police report, stamped by the Financial Crimes Division. I looked directly into my mother's eyes. "You did not borrow my credit, Mom," I said. My tone was flat and clinical. "You committed identity fraud. You supplied my Social Security number to facilitate a fraudulent bank loan across state lines. That is wire fraud. That is a federal crime." The room went dead quiet. The low hum of the refrigerator seemed to amplify in the heavy silence. My father's head dropped lower. He stared intently at the grain of the wood, unable to formulate a defense. The color drained entirely from my mother's face. She pulled her hand back as if the table had suddenly caught fire. Her breathing turned shallow. The word crime shattered the protective bubble she had built around her golden child. She realized I was not treating this as a domestic disagreement. I was treating it as a criminal prosecution. Justin, however, did not flinch. He put his smartphone face down on the table. He looked at the manila folder and then looked at me. He leaned back in his chair, tilting it onto its two back legs. He crossed his arms over his chest. He exhibited the smug arrogance of a man who firmly believed he was untouchable. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. He thought the papers on the table were a bluff, to scare them into compliance. He did not possess the intellectual capacity to understand the legal machinery I had already set into motion. He believed his leverage still held significant weight. He believed that because my parents' names remained on the deed of the house, I was still trapped by my own morality. He thought he controlled the chessboard. He smiled. It was a cold, calculating expression. He was preparing to double down. He was preparing to issue an ultimatum that would force me to choose between my own financial security and my parents' impending ruin. He thought he knew exactly how I would fold. He had no idea I was holding the remote detonator in my purse. Justin laughed. The sound was short and metallic, echoing off the drywall of the dining room. He dropped the front legs of his chair back onto the hardwood floor with a dull thud that rattled the ceramic plates. He lifted his right hand and began casually picking at the cuticle of his thumb. He was treating the printed felony statutes sitting on the oak table like a weak opening bid in a low-stakes poker game. He looked at the police report and then looked at me with an expression of pure, unfiltered pity. He thought I was playing a game of chicken I did not know how to win. "You are bluffing, Lauren," he scoffed. His voice carried the relaxed cadence of a man ordering a cocktail at a country club. "You printed some forms off the internet to make a point. I get it. You are upset about the hard inquiry on your credit file. You want to flex your corporate muscles. But you are not going to follow through. You do not have the stomach for actual conflict." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the oak table. He picked up his half-eaten turkey sandwich and slowly closed his fist. The bread and meat compressed between his fingers, turning into a ruined mess. It was a quiet, intense display of his suppressed rage. He dropped the crushed food back onto the ceramic plate and leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper. "Let us walk through your little scenario," he continued. "Let us pretend you actually walked into a precinct and filed that report. The moment you hand that paperwork to a detective, the investigation opens. They pull the phone records from the dealership. They subpoena the recorded audio of Mom and Dad verifying your employment and confirming your residency. You know exactly what happens next. The federal jurisdiction takes over. Mom and Dad go down right alongside me for supplying your personal information across state lines. You are going to send your own elderly parents to a federal prison over a car, over a piece of metal. You do not have the guts to do that to them." He wiped his greasy hand on a white cloth napkin and extended his open palm across the table. His fingers hovered inches from my folded hands. "Now give back the home equity line of credit applications. Give them back so Dad can sign the bottom line and we can satisfy the bank before the real tow trucks arrive. If you refuse, I will simply stop answering the phone. The vehicle goes into default. The collection agency takes the car. Your precious 800 credit score is destroyed forever. Your corporate firm runs an annual background check. A major financial delinquency will flag your file. You could lose your auditing license. You lose your career. And I walk away without a single scratch. It is your choice, sis. Sign the house over or ruin your own future." I sat motionless and studied the architecture of his threat. It was an impressive piece of psychological extortion. He was using my love for my parents as a human shield. He had positioned himself directly behind their physical safety and their legal freedom. He engineered a scenario where any incoming fire directed at him would have to pass through them first. He firmly believed he had boxed me into a corner with no viable exit strategy. In his mind, the mathematics were simple. Either I surrender the equity of the house I purchased to cover his theft, or I absorb a $60,000 catastrophic hit to my own financial identity. He presented the illusion of a binary choice. He thought he held all the leverage. I shifted my gaze to my mother. She sat frozen in her chair next to my father. She did not rebuke Justin for threatening her own freedom. She did not scold him for holding her housing security hostage. She did not express outrage that her son was actively blackmailing her daughter. Instead, she looked at me and offered a slow, deliberate nod. Her eyes were wide and filled with a silent, desperate plea. She was silently begging me to submit. She wanted me to hand over the bank documents. She was willing to sign away her shelter and bind herself to a predatory loan just to maintain a toxic equilibrium of the family dynamic. She wanted me to take the hit to keep the peace. This was the exact look she gave me when I was a teenager and Justin wrecked my first car. She begged me not to tell the insurance company he was driving without a license so his premium would not increase. She asked me to claim I hit a light pole. She expected me to absorb the penalty. I realized, staring at her across the dining table, that her affection was conditional. It was contingent upon my willingness to act as a buffer between her favorite child and the real consequences of his actions. She viewed me as a utility. I let the silence stretch out in the kitchen. I did not rush to fill the quiet space. In an audit, silence is a weapon. It forces the opposing party to sit with the weight of their own assertions. Justin kept his hand extended, palm up, waiting for the paperwork. He offered a confident smirk. He thought my silence was the sound of capitulation. He thought I was running the numbers in my head and realizing he held the winning hand. I slowly unclasped my hands. I reached down to the floor where my leather bag rested against the leg of the chair. Justin dropped his hand and sat back. A look of distinct relief washed over his features. My mother let out a heavy sigh, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. My father finally stopped staring at the wood grain and looked up. They all expected the exact same outcome. They expected me to pull the folded bank applications from my suit jacket and slide them across the table. They expected the safety net to deploy just like it always did. I did not reach into my jacket. I reached into the main compartment of my purse. My fingers brushed past the heavy black master key fob I had purchased from the dealership. I bypassed it and found the smooth metal edge of my cellular phone. I pulled the device out and placed it face up on the oak table next to the manila folder. The screen was dark, reflecting the dining room chandelier. I looked at my brother. The smirk on his face faltered slightly, replaced by a flicker of confusion. I kept my voice soft and measured. The volume of my words was inversely proportional to their impact. I do not need to call the cops, Justin, I said calmly. I already did. I filed the formal felony report yesterday morning. The financial crimes detective is pulling your dealership records right now. Justin's face flushed. His jaw tightened. He pointed a finger at me across the table. You are lying, he snapped, his voice losing its smooth country club cadence. If you called them, the bank would freeze the asset. Your credit would still tank while the investigation sat in legal limbo. You still lose. You are just trying to scare Dad out of signing. I picked up my phone and unlocked the screen. No, I do not, I replied. I do not need to ruin my credit. And I do not need Dad to sign a predatory loan. You see, Justin, you made a critical error when you stole my identity. You assumed I would fight the loan. You assumed I would try to distance myself from the asset to prove my innocence. You forgot how I make my living. I am an auditor. I follow the paper. And the paper says that $60,000 vehicle sitting in the driveway belongs entirely to me. I pushed my chair back from the oak table. The wooden legs scraped against the floorboards. I stood up. I picked up my cell phone and placed it into my jacket pocket. I reached for the manila folder containing the federal statutes and the police report. Justin watched my hands. His face turned a deep shade of crimson. The casual arrogance he displayed moments earlier vanished. He realized the conversation was over, and he had not secured the signatures he needed to save himself.
"Get out of my house!"
He snapped, his voice cracked slightly on the final syllable. He called it his house. He contributed nothing to the down payment. He paid 0 property taxes. He never pushed a lawnmower across the grass or repaired a leaking faucet. Yet he claimed ownership simply because he manipulated the people holding the deed. He stood up from his chair, knocking it backward.
"You are just jealous,"
he sneered, pointing a finger at my chest. You sit in your sterile little cubicle, crunching numbers for other people. You play it safe. You are terrified of the real world. You will never take risks like I do. You will never build anything. I paused and looked at him. I analyzed his definition of risk. Taking a risk implies a willingness to accept the potential negative outcome. Justin never accepted negative outcomes. He outsourced his failures. When he signed a commercial lease for a failing business, he did not risk his own capital. He risked my parents' retirement fund. When he wanted a luxury vehicle, he did not risk his own credit profile. He stole mine. He was not a visionary taking bold leaps. He was a parasite, draining the host to sustain his own illusion of grandeur. I built a career, a savings account, and a stable life through discipline. He built a house of cards using stolen plastic. You are right, Justin, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I am leaving. I closed my briefcase and engaged the brass clasps. The metal clicked shut. I did not say goodbye to my mother. I did not look at my father. Their silence during Justin's outburst was their final ruling. They had chosen their side. I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I walked down the narrow hallway. The framed family photographs on the wall seemed like artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The evening air was cool. The sun hovered just above the tree line, casting a golden hue over the suburban street. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog barked in the distance. The appraiser had departed hours ago, likely filing his valuation report with the lending institution. I heard the screen door squeak open behind me. Justin stepped out onto the porch. My parents followed closely behind him. My father wrapped his arms around his torso to ward off the chill. My mother gripped the edge of her sweater. They formed a unified front on the top step. They followed me outside to witness my retreat. They needed the visual confirmation of my defeat. They wanted to watch the reliable safety net walk away so they could return to the kitchen and figure out how to salvage Justin's manufactured crisis. They expected me to walk down the concrete path, get into my practical 10-year-old Honda Accord, and drive back to my predictable life. I walked down the 3 wooden steps. My heels clicked against the pavement. I reached the bottom and stopped. I did not turn left toward my sedan. I pivoted right. I walked directly toward the center of the driveway. The pearl-white Mercedes-Benz sat diagonally across the concrete. The vehicle was a monument to his vanity. It featured tinted windows, chrome trim, and low-profile tires. It was designed to signal wealth and success to anyone who saw it. I stopped 2 feet away from the driver's side door. Justin crossed his arms. He stood on the porch watching me. He thought I was inspecting the paint. He thought I was assessing the physical damage of the situation. He let out a harsh laugh.
"Take a good picture, Lauren,"
he called out over the lawn.
"It is the closest you will ever get to driving a machine like that."
I reached into the deep pocket of my structured coat. I pulled out my cellular phone. I opened the digital key application. The screen displayed a pristine rendering of the pearl white sedan. My thumb hovered over the digital unlock icon. I tapped the screen. The response from the German engineering was instantaneous. The vehicle chirped. The dual LED headlights flared to life, cutting through the evening shadows. The amber turn signals pulsed twice in rapid succession. The motorized side mirrors smoothly pivoted outward from their folded resting position with a quiet mechanical hum. The sound echoed across the silent street. The color drained entirely from Justin's face. His arms dropped to his sides. The smug expression shattered, replaced by genuine, unfiltered confusion. His brain struggled to process the sensory input. The visual evidence directly contradicted his understanding of reality. He took a step forward, almost stumbling off the edge of the porch.
What are you doing?
He yelled. His voice echoed down the cul-de-sac.
How did you unlock my car?
I did not answer his question. I grabbed the chrome handle. I pulled the heavy door open. The interior smelled of premium leather and expensive cologne. The ambient cabin lighting glowed a soft blue. I slid into the driver's seat. The ergonomic chair automatically adjusted to my profile, humming quietly beneath me. I placed my foot on the brake pedal. I pressed the silver ignition button on the dashboard. The engine turned over with a deep, powerful roar. The digital dashboard illuminated, displaying the exact mileage and fuel level. The climate control system activated, sending cool air through the vents. Justin sprinted down the porch steps. He ran across the manicured grass, his dress shoes slipping on the evening dew. He reached the edge of the driveway just as I shifted the gear selector into reverse. I kept my foot firmly on the brake pedal. I pressed the window control button on the door panel. The thick glass lowered smoothly, disappearing into the frame. Justin stood outside the window. He was breathing heavily. His hands were balled into fists. He looked at me sitting behind the steering wheel and then looked at the glowing dashboard.
Get out of my car,
he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. I looked up at him. I rested my hands on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. I maintained eye contact as I delivered the final audit of his life. It is not your car, Justin, I said. My voice was calm, carrying the weight of undisputed facts. Look at the registration in the glove box. Look at the financing agreement. It is my name. It is my credit profile. It is my car. I paused, letting the reality of the situation anchor itself in his mind. I watched his eyes dart back and forth as the trap finally snapped shut around him. And I am repossessing it. Justin grabbed the edge of the open window frame. His knuckles turned white. He realized I was not bluffing. He realized the vehicle, the foundation of his entire professional image, was about to roll backward into the street and disappear. He looked back at our parents, standing frozen on the porch, and then looked back at me. He opened his mouth and issued a threat that would escalate the conflict beyond the point of no return. Justin gripped the chrome handle of the driver's side door. He pulled upward, leveraging his entire body weight against the metal mechanism. Before the latch could disengage, I pressed my index finger against the master control switch located on the leather armrest. A heavy mechanical thud echoed through the enclosed cabin. The central security system engaged instantly, securing all 4 entry points. Justin slammed his open palm against the reinforced safety glass. The impact vibrated through the thick door panel, but I did not flinch. I sat comfortably in the climate-controlled interior, observing his rising panic. He abandoned the door and sprinted toward the front of the vehicle. He planted his hands flat on the sloping hood, leaving sweaty palm prints on the pristine paint surface. He glared at me through the windshield. His chest heaved. He turned his head toward the wooden porch where our parents remained frozen in place.
Call emergency services,
he ordered. His voice was hoarse, scraping against his throat. Call them right now, Mom. She is stealing my car. Tell them it is a grand theft auto in progress. Tell them the suspect is trying to run me over in the driveway. My mother fumbled with the deep pockets of her knit cardigan. She produced her cellular device. Her hand shook so violently she dropped the phone onto the wooden porch deck. The plastic protective case cracked upon impact, skidding toward the top step. My father did not bend down to retrieve it. He simply stared at the scene unfolding in his front yard. He recognized the irreversible nature of the moment. He knew decades of enabling had finally collided with an immovable object. I did not need my mother to dial the authorities. I had already coordinated the logistics. Earlier that morning, before leaving the downtown precinct, I requested a civil standby. I provided the desk sergeant with the address and the specific time I intended to retrieve my stolen property to prevent any potential breach of the peace. I looked at the digital clock glowing on the illuminated dashboard display. It read 6:22. Right on schedule. A pair of bright headlights rounded the corner of the suburban cul-de-sac. The approaching vehicle moved slowly, casting a sweeping beam across the manicured lawns and brick mailboxes. It was a marked municipal patrol cruiser. The red and blue light bar mounted on the roof flashed rhythmically, painting the neighborhood trees in alternating vibrant colors. The cruiser pulled up to the curb, parking directly behind my older sedan. Justin let go of the hood. A wave of triumphant relief washed over his features. He believed his salvation had arrived on demand. He firmly believed the universe was course-correcting to protect his interests. He sprinted across the damp grass toward the arriving patrol car. 2 uniformed patrolmen stepped out of the cruiser. They wore heavy leather utility belts and standard-issue tactical vests over their shirts. The older patrolman placed his hand near his shoulder-mounted radio microphone, observing the running man. Justin closed the distance, waving his arms frantically in the air. He pointed an accusing finger at the white luxury sedan. "Arrest that woman!" he demanded. His tone carried the practiced authority of a man accustomed to giving orders in boardrooms and fancy restaurants. "That person is attempting to steal my vehicle!" "I have the title documents inside the house. She somehow hacked into my car system. Get her out of the driver's seat right now!" The patrolmen did not draw their weapons. They did not rush toward the car to execute a dramatic extraction. They assessed the chaotic situation with practiced professional neutrality. The older patrolman instructed his younger partner to remain on the grass with Justin. He walked up the concrete driveway, approaching my window. I pressed the control button, lowering the glass entirely. I kept both hands clearly visible, resting them on the top of the steering wheel. "Good evening, officer," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I am the legal owner of this vehicle. I requested the civil standby earlier today." The patrolman nodded, acknowledging my statement. He asked to see my identification. I reached into my tailored jacket pocket and retrieved my state-issued license. I leaned over and opened the glove compartment, removing the state registration card. Finally, I reached into the passenger seat and picked up the stamped document from the Financial Crimes Division. I handed all 3 items through the open window. The patrolman clicked a small tactical flashlight attached to his uniform strap. He illuminated the papers in the fading evening light. He checked the photograph on my license. He matched the printed name to the vehicle registration details. He leaned forward and verified the identification number printed on the card against the metal plate visible through the bottom corner of the windshield. The alphanumeric sequence aligned perfectly. Then he unfolded the precinct document. He read the assigned case number and the summary paragraph detailing the identity theft allegations. He nodded and handed my license registration and the report back through the window. He turned around and walked back toward the grass where his partner stood next to my brother. Justin stood tall, straightening the collar of his navy shirt, expecting the authority figure to drag me out of the leather seat. Instead, the older patrolman stopped 2 feet away from Justin. "Sir," he began, his voice projecting clearly across the quiet yard. "We are here on a civil standby. We have verified the documents. The vehicle sitting in the driveway is legally registered to the woman sitting inside it. She has the lawful right to possess it. Please step away from the driveway and allow her to leave." Justin did not step away. The fragile illusion of his control finally shattered. He opened his mouth and let out a string of profanities. He lunged past the younger patrolman, attempting to reach the hood of my car. He screamed that I was a thief and demanded they arrest me immediately. The older patrolman stepped into his path, placing a firm hand on Justin's chest to stop his forward momentum. He ordered Justin to calm down and step back. Justin slapped the officer's hand away. He shoved the patrolman hard in the shoulder. It was the worst calculation he had ever made. The younger patrolman grabbed Justin's right arm, twisting it downward with practiced efficiency. The older patrolman grabbed his left arm. They forced him face first against the side panel of their municipal cruiser. The metal ratchets of steel handcuffs clicked shut, echoing sharply in the quiet suburban evening. "You are under arrest for assaulting a law enforcement officer and resisting with violence," the older patrolman stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "And I am sure the financial crimes detective will be very happy to know we already have you in custody." The invisible safety net dissolved into thin air. The violent reality of his own actions finally caught up to him. He stopped struggling. The shock paralyzed his motor functions. He looked past the uniformed men searching for our parents on the wooden porch. He wanted them to intervene. He wanted them to shield him one last time. But they stood frozen, unable to stop the consequences of a federal law. I shifted the car into reverse and prepared to drive away, leaving the wreckage behind me. I did not stay to watch him cry. I looked through the rearview mirror and watched the younger patrolman place a heavy hand on the top of Justin's head, guiding him downward into the back seat of the municipal cruiser. The heavy metal door slammed shut, sealing him inside the cage. The sound was muffled by the thick acoustic glass of the Mercedes-Benz. I shifted the gear selector into drive. I took my foot off the brake pedal and let the heavy vehicle roll forward. I navigated out of the quiet cul-de-sac, leaving my parents standing on the wooden porch bathed in the flashing red and blue lights of the police vehicle. The drive across town was silent. I did not turn on the premium audio system. I did not adjust the climate control. I simply sat in the ambient blue glow of the cabin, listening to the low hum of the German engineering and the sound of my own steady breathing. My destination was not my townhouse. I was not going home to celebrate. My destination was a high-volume luxury auto broker located in the commercial district of the city. The broker office was a modern glass wall building filled with bright fluorescent lighting. A man named David met me in the paved parking lot, holding a digital tablet. He walked around the pearl-white sedan, noting the pristine condition of the paint, the undamaged alloy wheels, and the low mileage displayed on the digital odometer. We walked inside the building and sat across from each other at a cold metal desk. I handed him the master purchase agreement, the state registration, and the heavy black smart key. David ran the vehicle identification numbers through his appraisal software. The depreciation on a new luxury vehicle is immediate the moment the tires leave the original dealership lot. The screen generated a wholesale value. He offered me exactly $52,000. It was a solid calculated number, based on market data. I accepted the offer immediately, without negotiation. We drafted the transfer paperwork in silence. Justin had created a $60,450 liability under my name. The wholesale sale covered the majority of the debt. I opened my personal banking application on my cellular phone. I initiated a direct wire transfer for the remaining $8,450, sending my own saved capital directly to the lending institution. I paid a steep financial price to clear the ledger, but the transaction wiped the delinquent loan from my credit profile forever. Within 30 days, my numerical score rebounded to its original pristine state. I bought my financial identity back with cash and logic. Justin did not get the opportunity to launch his new consulting firm. It is very difficult to secure high net worth investors when your public record features a fresh booking photograph. He spent 2 nights in the county holding facility before our parents drained the last of their checking account to post his bail bond. The district attorney handling the case did not offer leniency. The paper trail I provided to the detective was airtight. Faced with the overwhelming physical evidence, Justin eventually pleaded guilty to felony wire fraud to avoid a lengthy and public trial. The presiding judge sentenced him to 3 years of supervised probation. He is required to submit to random audits of his personal finances, and he must pay court-ordered restitution to cover the legal fees of the state. He lost his voting rights. He cannot own a firearm. More importantly, He can never pass a corporate background check again. The man who called himself a serial entrepreneur is currently working third shift at a regional logistics warehouse, loading heavy cardboard boxes onto freight trucks. He wears a faded high-visibility vest instead of a tailored quarter-zip sweater. His professional image is permanently shattered. The legal consequences for my parents required a different approach. The Monday morning following Justin's arrest, I returned to the property on Elm Tree Lane. I walked into the kitchen and found them sitting at the exact same oak dining table. The predatory home equity line of credit applications were gone. In their place, I set down a single manila envelope. Inside the envelope was a legal quitclaim deed. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. I explained the new reality of their situation. I told them I possessed the recorded phone logs from the dealership proving they aided a federal crime by verifying my stolen identity. I informed them I had the power to hand those audio files directly to the assigned detective handling Justin's prosecution. I offered them a binary choice. I would withhold the evidence and decline to press criminal charges against them under one non-negotiable condition. They had to sign the quitclaim deed transferring total ownership of the property to a private limited liability company. I formed the LLC earlier that morning. I was the sole managing member. My father picked up the pen without speaking. His hands shook violently as he pressed the metal tip against the dotted line. He managed to scratch out his name. As he led the pen, a single tear fell from his eye and landed directly on the heavy paper, smudging the fresh black ink of his signature. It was a physical manifestation of his absolute helplessness. My mother signed next, weeping silently beside him. They surrendered the only asset they had left to keep themselves out of a courtroom. They now have zero financial power. They cannot borrow money against the drywall. They cannot leverage the roof to fund another bad idea. They are legally classified as tenants living inside my corporate structure. They pay $1 a month in rent, and I hold the sole power of eviction. The infinite safety net is gone, replaced by a strict landlord. If you are listening to this narrative and you find yourself holding everything together for ungrateful people, I need you to hear me clearly. You do not have to sacrifice your own peace to keep them warm. Family is a biological accident, but loyalty is an earned currency. When people view you as a resource rather than a human being, you owe them nothing. Facts do not care about guilt trips. Peace does not come from giving in to emotional manipulation. Real lasting peace comes from drawing a hard line in the concrete and refusing to move. It comes from trusting the math and building a fortress they cannot breach. It has been 6 months since I drove away from Elm Tree Lane. My daily routine has returned to the quiet predictability I fought so hard to build. I sit at my kitchen island drinking black tea and reviewing my investment portfolios. The numbers align perfectly. Every ledger is balanced. My credit profile sits exactly at 810. I bought my peace back, and it is a tangible asset. Looking back at the wreckage, I realize people often wonder how I managed to stay entirely calm while my own flesh and blood tried to dismantle my security. They ask how I walked away from that kitchen table without screaming or throwing a single plate. I tell them that survival requires a rigid system. When the individuals who are supposed to protect you become the active threat, you must rely on a proven framework. I did not rely on hope. I relied on these 5 strict rules to survive the fire. Rule number 1, treat betrayal as a mathematical equation. Emotions are a luxury you cannot afford during a financial or legal crisis. When someone steals from you, do not waste time asking why they did it. Do not search for a complex psychological explanation to justify their actions. Look for the paper trail. Locate the structural damage, quantify the exact dollar amount, and build a precise plan to neutralize the threat. Rule number 2, shared biology is not a binding legal contract. Society constantly pushes a narrative that family demands infinite forgiveness. That is a dangerous myth designed to keep capable people trapped in toxic cycles. True loyalty must be earned through consistent respect and mutual care. If a relative views you as a utility or a human shield, they have already broken the social contract. You are not obligated to finance their delusions. Rule number 3. Silence is your most devastating weapon. When you discover a profound deception, your immediate instinct is verbal confrontation. You want to yell and demand immediate accountability. Suppress that urge. Early confrontation simply gives the opposition time to build a defense or destroy the evidence. Stay completely quiet. Gather your receipts, secure your assets, consult the proper authorities, and build an airtight case in the shadows. Let your first move be the final checkmate. Rule number 4. The enabler is frequently more dangerous than the primary abuser. My brother committed the actual forgery, but my parents handed him the lockbox. The person who stands quietly by and allows the destruction to happen just to maintain their manufactured peace is actively participating in your ruin. You cannot save an enabler from their own choices. You can only permanently remove their access to your resources. Rule number 5. Genuine peace requires a hard line poured in concrete. You cannot negotiate compromises with people who operate outside of reality. You must establish strict boundaries backed by legal and financial force. Setting yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm will only guarantee you turn to ash. You must prioritize your own survival over their comfort. I close my laptop and finish my tea. I do not wonder how Justin is handling his night shifts at the logistics warehouse. I do not worry about my parents paying their single dollar of rent. I focus entirely on the future I secured with my own 2 hands. If you are navigating a similar storm right now, I hope this framework gives you the strength to stand your ground. You deserve a life entirely free from manipulation. I have 2 questions for you today. First, if you could legally trap someone who betrayed your trust, what would your strategy look like? And second, which of these 5 rules resonated with you the most? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If this story gave you a little peace of mind today, please make sure you like this video and subscribe to Sweet Karma Life. I will be waiting for you in the next one.